I'm going to start by saying that 20th Century Women is one of my favorite movies, but I didn't expect to like it at first as the promotions and trailer were very misleading. As seen in a comment section that perfectly describes this confusion, no one seems to understand the movie. It's an honest meditation on motherhood, mortality, relationships, American culture, the sexual revolution, the punk revolution, feminism, and surprisingly, manhood. In fact, 20th Century Women analyzes men and feminism in a really interesting way. To analyze this film properly, I'm going to use classic 3-act structure. To those who aren't familiar, 3-act structure isn't a set of rules, but a guide to understand and design stories, and it's applied very heavily in Hollywood filmmaking. I'll also be combining Chris Vogler's model with Blake Snyder's since they offer a better understanding together than apart. We'll be focusing on the main points that help define Dorothea's character arc and the message of the film. According to the general model of the 3-act structure, all protagonists have a want and a need. Their want is their goal at the beginning of the story, and their need is what they come to realize they needed by the end of it. Another way to think of it is as the lesson of the film. The protagonist's journey through these points is known as their character arc. Dorothea is an interesting character because she's already learned her lesson at the beginning of her arc. The film begins with a provocative opening image, Dorothea's car burning outside a grocery store. This is a great setup for the film's ordinary world, where everything is changing. We learn that Jamie's father has left his son and wife, and their family of sorts is now comprised of a young feminist woman, Abby, a mechanic and handyman, William, and Jamie's best friend and love interest, Julie. Jamie is at a crossroads in life, exploring his purpose, limits, and sexuality. Through Dorothea's memories, we see how she raised Jamie and what values she held up for him.
No, he's a person. He's not half a person, and he's not some cute little guy. He has volition and autonomy and privacy. He needs a bank account.
This serves as the film's theme statement, where the theme of the film is spoken or demonstrated early on. What's interesting here is that the protagonist herself makes the theme statement, whereas it's typically a supporting character. Dorothea already knows her lesson, but is losing touch with it as her son departs from her fostered image of him. This distinction is solidified at the film's catalyst event, a story point which changes the ordinary world. Jamie's health scare is what triggers the break into Act 2.
You don't need to worry about it. Why didn't you think?
When Dorothea enlists Julie and Abby to help raise her son.
I mean, don't you need a man to raise a man?
No, I don't think so.
However, Dorothea's plan immediately spawns more disagreement with Jamie. When he questions her motives and methods, she replies with,
"You just feel guilty because it's just me and you."
You don't know what I'm feeling.
This will become one of the film's important motifs and set up the ending theme. Dorothea doesn't feel that her son has the right to define her. The first half of a second act of a film is referred to by Blake Snyder as the fun and games. Essentially, it's where the main questions of the story are asked and where the characters and theme are explored. This film focuses on 3 core elements: expectations, assumptions, and generalizations. 20th Century Women starts this section with a scene between Abby and William.
Do you want to fool around with me?
Like the rest of the film, the scene is very politely comedic and intentionally awkward, but it goes in a really interesting direction when Abby tells William that she can't have sex with him unless they roleplay.
Really? I can't just be myself.
No.
This question is revisited a lot, as to what role the male characters have to fulfill for their female counterparts and how they are expected to act. One phrase that is greatly emphasized and repeated by multiple characters is inappropriate.
How about the possibility that you're choosing boys who are inappropriate?
The question is initially never raised as to whether the female characters are appropriate for their male counterparts. However, the word incompetent is brought up when Abby is being given bad news about her cervical cancer.
You have an incompetent cervix.
Incompetent?
This scene serves as a parallel to the other expectations, where Abby's body is viewed as incompetent because it can't bear children, something that's expected of her. Ironically, it's the result of her mother trying to conform to the expectations for women of her own time by taking DES medication to avoid miscarriages. Expectations are brought back again when Julie tries to teach Jamie how a man should hold a cigarette.
Guys aren't supposed to look like they're thinking about what they look like.
The second element, assumptions. Julie consistently ignores Jamie's vocal attraction to her and seems to use him for a sense of security and comfort as her world changes, both in ways in and out of her control.
People say that they're falling in love, but they're not actually falling in love. It's a fake connection that you feel with someone.
Going back to Dorothea, the film centers on its third element, generalizations, which play into assumptions. While asking Jamie to support Abby when she comes home from the hospital, Dorothea remarks,
Men always feel like they have to fix things for women.
Despite her previous championing of Jamie's individuality and agency, Dorothea is now reducing her son to a generalized assumption of him. As we later see, Jamie outperforms this generalized assumption, going with Abby to the hospital and helping her deal with the pain of her bad news in person. This section ends on one more assumption, by Dorothea's coworker when he asks her out on a date.
Well, some of the guys thought you were a lesbian, you know.
This generalization of straight women and lesbian women, as well as the assumption of Dorothea's heterosexual obsolescence and expectation for how she has to act and present herself, clearly offends her. Dorothea again faces an important lesson. She doesn't like being generalized and assumed. The next important section in the film's three-act structure is the midpoint, which is quite literally the middle of the movie. It's defined by a major dynamic shift in the story, or a moment when the inner conflict of the protagonist becomes clearer. In this case, it's both. After catching Julie sneaking out of Jamie's room in the morning, Dorothea follows and questions her. She quickly loses control of the confrontation as Julie changes the dynamic.
Do you think you've moved on since his dad? You never seem into it. Except for with William. But he's inappropriate.
Notice the word choice coming back. This scene also subtly clarifies Julie as an antagonist to Jamie and Dorothea, setting up the next section of the film. Soon after, we find Dorothea exploring the current day culture alongside William and Abby. After saying that,
I don't know if I'm gonna find an appropriate man here.
this happens.
What was that? What does that mean?
Oh.
Aren't you sleeping with Abby?
That's not something serious.
At this point in the three-act structure, bad guys close in. Our bad guys are becoming more defined and more immediately threatening. It also reiterates the questions raised in Fun and Games. This is solidified by Dorothea's remarks on her son's generation and that interaction with William.
This is what my son believes in. These people, with this hair and these clothes, making these gestures, making these sounds.
They don't know this is the end of punk. They don't know that Reagan's coming. It's impossible to imagine that kids will stop dreaming about nuclear war and have nightmares about the weather. It's impossible to imagine HIV, what will happen with skateboard tricks, the internet.
It also frames Dorothea in a very interesting way by pointing out her irrational reaction to Y2K before her death by cancer from smoking. She too is a product of her times. She's wise, but not as wise as she thinks, and this puts her ability to teach Jamie into question. That same night, a drunk and beaten up Abby comes home to find Julie and Jamie in bed and tries to give some advice.
You cannot let her sleep here if she's not having sex with you. It's disempowering.
The next morning, Abby gives Jamie some feminist literature. Though none of what Jamie reads or learns is bad, he reads it because it's expected of him. To further clarify the conflict, the sequence after shows Dorothea and William, two people previously in conflict, bonding. Dorothea explains how William came from a working class background, didn't finish college because he couldn't afford it, and temporarily lived in a commune with his girlfriend. William wasn't appropriate for one world, so he takes up with any women who make him feel like he is appropriate. He doesn't have any real expectations or requirements for them. Even in the warm and sweet moment where William and Dorothea dance together, she expresses expectations she has for him. However, this also functions as positive character development for William. Dorothea does have some things to teach after all. As the second act nears its close, Abby reiterates her advice to Jamie.
Jamie, you're in love with Julie. You can't let her push you around.
In their next sequence together, Jamie reads Dorothea a section from one of Abby's books on older women.
All I ask is to get to know people and to have them interested in knowing me. I doubt whether I would marry again and live that close to another individual, but I remain invisible.
So you think you know me better because you read that?
Again, she's offended and offensive because she doesn't like being defined. And this comes at an important point in the story, since it's hypocritical when put alongside the definitions and assumptions she applied to her son, which led her on this journey in the first place. This is directly preceded by an argument between Dorothea and Abby, where she essentially unenlists her from helping to raise Jamie. Dorothea is beginning to realize through Abby that she's raising Jamie based on expectations set for him by others.
He's a 15-year-old boy.
I know.
You're giving him hardcore feminism.
Again, what he's learning isn't bad, but it's not letting him define himself. This point in the 3-act structure is known as the all is lost moment. As one of my writing teachers once defined it, it's where mentors go to die. It's when the protagonist's source of guidance and security is ripped away from them. Dorothea's plan is starting to collapse. The next important beat for this film is its break into 3, and is usually characterized by an extreme dynamic shift. Here, Dorothea is forced to act against Abby and Julie as they talk about things at the dinner table that she deems inappropriate.
Abby, you know what? You're menstruating, okay? And do we really need to know everything that's going on with you?
In a final attempt to get her son back on track, Dorothea decides it's time to talk to him one-on-one. Jamie accuses his mother of not helping him but burdening him, and he's right. The scene after shows Jamie standing up for himself with Julie, which follows Abby's advice and is in direct response to what Julie said at dinner.
You can't sleep here anymore and just want to talk.
To get the relationship back under her control, Julie offers Jamie something that he's always wanted.
Let's just get out of here. Let's go up the coast, you said that we would.
This sets up the final 2 confrontations of the film, which serve as the climax. In the first, Jamie confesses his love for Julie, something she's previously expressed she doesn't believe in. But she twists his confession into a bullying assumption and generalization.
I love you.
You're being like the other guys.
I don't want to just have sex with you. I want you.
But it's your version of me. It would be a lot better if you just wanted sex.
This is particularly interesting because it ties back to the moments in the film where the male characters have had to be something else to be appropriate. Jamie had to behave stoically at the party, William had to roleplay with Abby, and similar to Dorothea's response to Abby's feminist literature, Julie doesn't like being defined by someone else.
You are exactly like the other guys. You just seem like you're all modern.
Sadly, this generalization has been aimed at Jamie before by his mother.
Men always feel like they have to fix things for women.
Mom, I'm not all men. Okay, I'm just me.
Well,
This causes Jamie to leave Julie and triggers the final confrontation between him and the protagonist. This moment is defined by Blake Snyder as the dig down. And the protagonist uses everything the film has taught them to try and really solve the problem. When this begins, Dorothea doesn't take Jamie as seriously at first as she should.
Julie's a pretty complicated woman. It's a lot to take on, but I'm impressed in a way.
And this pushes him away even further, where she will finally have to admit that she was wrong.
Jamie,
What?
I thought they'd help.
Well, it just seemed like you couldn't deal with me anymore.
Look, I don't want you to end up in the same place as me.
What does that mean?
Well, I wanted you to be happier.
And I just didn't think I could do it by myself.
Unlike most films, 20th Century Women spends a long time on what Vogler calls the return with the elixir. It's when the characters have solved the problem and now apply the fix. It's typically a calm and reflective point in the story, and this is no different.
I want to bleach my hair.
Dorothea begins granting Jamie the agency and support she once gave him. We as an audience can see the application of the film's theme through Dorothea's character arc. She begins the plot believing that her son needs to be structured and defined in order to be raised properly, but over the course of the story has to remember that he is an individual and has to be raised and viewed as one. He can't simply be raised as a man, since that means raising him according to someone else's expectations, assumptions, and generalizations. The film ends very subtly. Dorothea flies into the sunset in a biplane, one of her dreams. She's free, at peace, and defined only by herself. Each character is set forth now by their own expectations. The best examples are Abby, who goes against the advice of her doctor to have 2 healthy children, and William, who continues his lifestyle, making pottery and navigating relationships with women. 20th Century Women is not a critique of feminism, a quiet point made alongside the movement, not in counter to it. Simply put, it's an application of feminist ideals to men. Its theme is simple. You don't have to be anything for anyone. You are the only person who can define you. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing as well as supporting us over on Patreon. It really helps support and grow this channel, and you can get exclusive access to behind-the-scenes content, early access to videos, and vote on what video we release next. Stay healthy.